The Skaven, a race of verminous creatures whose numbers could drown out the horizon line. Their dark influence is spread across the old and the new world alike. But even then, with a race that is so expansive and dominant, gnawing at the roots of the world, there is a disturbing lack of knowledge about the Skaven. Imperial and dwarf scholars know very little about the true origins of these vile creatures. But there are some clues that shed a dim light on their dark story. From the jungles and swamps of Lustria to the darkest places of the World's Edge Mountains, from the blasted hellscapes of the Dark Lands to the vast and endless deserts of Araby, the Skaven roam the world. Only the verdant paradise that is Ulthuan is safe in the grasp of the Vermintide. How the Skaven came to be is still a mystery, and despite the magnitude of the threat beneath their feet, the majority of nations do not acknowledge that the children of the Horned Rat exist. Some scholars and academics classify the Skaven as a mutated variant of beastmen. Both seem to be an evil parody of the human body form, and both twisted into dark reflections of the spirit of man. The beastmen reflect a dark form of pride and jealousy, while the Skaven reflect the nature of treachery in human society. Others suggest the Skaven are mutated forms of common rats, corrupted by foul magic. Skaven history is also a form of mystery to the Skaven themselves. The Ratmen naturally do not live very long, and are not concerned by their own origins. Most Skaven lives are disposable, and they are spent on dangerous experiments, slave labor, and as cannon fodder on the battlefront. In addition, most Skaven do not know how to read or write. Only those in the highest positions, Greyseers and warlords of the many thrall clans, have the ability to do so, and very few are too concerned with the past and future of their race, only keen on keeping themselves in positions of power, and to an extent, alive. They do not account for great deeds such as victories in battle, or important inventions. Some clans keep records, but they are mostly a barrage of claims and counterclaims, hyperbole and excuses. Perhaps those that are most knowledgeable about the origins of the Skaven are not the Skaven, the dwarves, or even the men of the Empire. To explore this reality, we must head to the fertile peninsula that is Telea. The people of Telea have dealt with the Ratmen for much longer than the Empire of Man. While the Empire tries to cover up the existence of this constant menace, Telea is far more knowledgeable, aware, and responsible when dealing with the ever-present lurking enemy. The only document available about the first encounter with the Skaven is the tale called The Doom of Calves, an ancient Telean poem with 13 stanzas. Copies of this tale have inexplicably disappeared from the Empire, but the tale is still known in Telea. The text reads as follows. Once upon a time, long, long ago, men and dwarves lived together beneath the roof of one great city. Some said it was the oldest and greatest city in the world, and had existed before the time of the Longbeards and Manlings. built by older and wiser hands in the dawn of the world. The city lay both above and below the earth, in keeping with the nature of the populace that dwelt there. The dwarves ruled in their great halls of stone below ground, and wrestled the fruits of the rock free with their day-long toil, while the manlings reaped the fields of swaying corn that surrounded the city with a patchwork blanket of gold. The sun smiled, men laughed, and everyone was happy. One day, the men of the city decided that they should give praise to their gods for their good fortune. They planned a temple such as the world had never seen before. In the central square, a colossal hall would be built, and topped with a single cloud-piercing tower. A tower so tall it would touch the very heart of the heavens. After much planning, and with the help of the Longbeards, they set about their monumental task. Weeks became months, and months became years, and still the manlings built. Men grew old and gray working on that great temple, their sons continuing their work through summer sun and winter rain. At last, after many generations, work began on the great spire itself. Years passed, and the tower reached such a height that the manlings found it ever more difficult to take the stone up to the top. Eventually, the work slowed to a crawl, and finishing the tower seemed impossible. Then one came among the men of the city, who offered his help in their great scheme. He asked a single boon of them in return, and claimed that if they grant him this, he would complete the tower in a single night. The manlings said to themselves, "What have we to lose?" and offered to make a bargain with the gray-clad stranger. All he wished was to add his own dedication to the gods onto the temple structure. The manlings agreed, and the bargain was struck. At dusk, the stranger entered the unfinished temple and bade the manlings to return at midnight. Clouds swept over the moons, cloaking the temple in darkness as the manlings left. All over the city, men watched and waited as the hours slipped past, until, near midnight, by ones and twos, they gathered again in the temple square. The wind blew, and the clouds parted as they gazed up at the temple. It rose like an unbroken lance against the sky, pure and white. At its very peak, a great horned bell hung gleaming coldly in the moonlight. The stranger's dedication to the gods was there, but of the stranger himself, there was no sign. The manlings rejoiced that their father's work was done. They surged forward to enter the temple. Then, at the stroke of midnight, the great bell began to toll. Once. Twice. Thrice. Slow, heavy waves of sound rolled across the city. 4. 5. 6 times the bell rang, like the torpid pulse of a bronze giant. 7. 8. 9. The rolling of the bell grew louder with each ring. and the manlings staggered back from the temple steps, clutching their ears. 10. 11. 12. 13. At the 13th stroke, lightning split the skies and thunder echoes through the night. High above, the dark circle of Morrslieb was lit by a bright flash, and all fell ominously silent. The manlings fled to their beds, frightened and puzzled by the portents they had seen. Next morning they arose to find that the darkness had come to the city. Brooding storm clouds reared above the rooftops, and such rain fell as had never been seen before. Black, like ash, the rain fell and puddled in the streets, slicking the cobbles with darkly iridescent colors. At first, some of the manlings didn't worry. They waited for the rain to stop so that they might resume their work. But the rain did not stop. The winds blew stronger, and lightning shook the high tower. Days stretched into weeks, and still the rain did not stop. Each night the bell tolled 13 times. In each morning the darkness lay across the city. The manlings became fearful and prayed to their gods. Still, the rains did not stop, and the black clouds hung like a shroud over the fields of flattened corn. The manlings went to the dwarves and beseeched their help. The Longbeards were unconcerned. What mattered a little rain on the surface? In the bosom of the earth, all was warm and dry. Now the manlings huddled in their dwelling, fear gnawing at their hearts. They sent some of the number to faraway places to seek help, but none of them returned. Some went to the temple to pray and sacrifice their dwindling food to the gods, but they found the temple door closed to them. The rain grew heavier. Dark hailstones fell from the sky and crushed the sodden crops. The great bell tolled a death knell over the terrified city. Soon great stones cleft the heavens, rushing down like dark meteors to smash the homes of the manlings. Many sickened and died from no apparent cause, and the newborn babies of the manlings were hideously twisted. Skulking vermin devoured what little stored corn there was left, and the manlings began to starve. The manling elders went to see the dwarves again, and this time demanded their help. They wanted to bring their folk below ground to safety. They wanted food. The Longbeards grew angry, and told the manlings that the lower workings were flooded, and their food had also been devoured by rats. There remained barely enough food and shelter for them and their kinsmen. They cast the manlings out of their halls, and closed their doors once more. In the ruins of the city above, each day became more deadly than the last. The manlings despaired and called for succor from the dark gods, whispered the names of forgotten demon princes in the hope of salvation. But none came. Instead, the vermin returned, bigger and bolder than ever. Their slinking furred shapes infested the broken city, feasting on the fallen and pulling down the weak. Each midnight the bell tolled 13 times on high, seeming now brazen and triumphant. The manlings lived as hunted creatures in their own city, as great rat packs roamed the streets in search of them. At last, the desperate manlings took up such weapons as they had and beat upon the dwarves' door, threatening that if they did not emerge, they would drag them out by their beards. No reply came from within. The manlings took up beams and battered down the doors to reveal the tunnels below, dark and empty. Stealing themselves, the pitiful remnants of the city's once proud populace descended. In the ancient hall of kingship they found the dwarves, now naught but gnawed bones and scraps of cloth. And there they saw by the dying light of their torches the myriad of eyes about them, glittering like liquid midnight, as the rats closed in for the kill. The manlings stood back to back and fought for their lives. But against such implacable ferocity and countless numbers of the verminous horde, their weapons were useless. The tide of monstrous rats flowed over them one by one, dragging them down to be torn apart, the yellow chiseled teeth sinking into their soft flesh, the dark tufted mass drowning their pitiful screams with their hideous chittering. Since their inception, hundreds of years ago, the Skaven race has proven to be one of the most dangerous threats to the Warhammer world. It is an ever-growing menace that schemes and plots the downfall of humanity. When emerging from their lairs to the field of battle, they are a deadly horde of unimaginably vast numbers that blends destructive war machines with dark magic. The verminous hordes move at speeds that belies their staggering size. They seem to flow in endless waves of chittering ratmen, and when the battle is over, they disappear like floodwaters, draining in countless unseen holes, leaving little to no trace of their existence, save only smoking ruins and scoured lands. Even as we speak, they wait in the dark beneath us, ever watching with beady eyes for the right moment to strike. It is said that after the children of the Horned Rat overran the city that was to become Skavenblight, they were forced to expand quickly, as their numbers only seemed to grow. They opened tunnels by day as the surface was too dangerous for the Radmen. Wild orcs and somewhat organized human tribes roamed the nearby lands. Now, with the passing of time, uncountable Skaven lairs exist throughout the entire world. Tunnels run across the mountain ranges, Rocky cliff lines, below rivers and through volcanoes, no place is safe from the grasp of the Vermintide. When Skaven lairs get too big, they become undercities. Typically, these undercities can grow under the largest of settlements. While dwarves and elves have grown too cunning for such things, from experience and nature, respectively, undercities thrive under filthy and unkept conditions. The sewers of many of the cities of the Empire are prime for ratmen infiltration and growth. However, no undercity can even come close to the vile metropolis that is the capital city of the Skaven. Ever since the inception of the Skaven, thousands of tunnels have been opened and widened through time. But all tunnels can be said to lead to one blighted place, to the rotting heart of the world. Skavenblight is the capital of what one would call the Skaven race, though calling them a unified society is simply untrue. This decay-ridden nexus is a truly massive underground settlement, with countless tunnels crossing with one another, forming a chaotic network of passages wired with all forms of traps that only a Skaven from the right clan would know how to go through. Surrounded by seemingly endless swamps and murky waters, Skavenblight is permanently covered in a thick layer of poisonous smog that prevents the light of the sun from penetrating its gloom. Beyond the blighted marshes and the stench, one can see the sky-piercing tower that crowns the decaying and twisted city. But the big majority of the tunnels, breeding pits and infernal machines can be found underground, where there are innumerable levels and caverns that make Skavenblight an impossible labyrinth to understand. What's most impressive is that the city is so massive that through its innumerable tunnels and passages, it extends thousands of miles in all directions beneath the surface, even diving into the roots of the World Edge Mountains and beyond. Skavenblight is the trade center of the Under Empire. From all across the world do Skaven clans come to the most populated city to trade and barter. At the center of the city, deep, many miles beneath the surface, lies the great temple of the Horned Rat. This place is only accessible through a mechanism of levers and massive chains that are lowered into the depths of the city. Here lies the Council of 13.
I kill dwarf things in Pillar City. No! Clanmores go to Southlands. Hunt for Warpstone. Moors are puppet minion. Pestilence infest Lastria. Yes. But all Warpstone for council plan.
The leaders of the greatest layers of the Ratmen hold 12 seats, while the 13th is symbolically held in reserve for the Great Horned Rat. There they plot and plan the end of the world, and the final ascension of the race to the surface.
Return to your assigned clan. Harvest Warpstone. Yes, most precipitous of masters. And flee yourself, your impertinence. Oh, it will be done, your worship.
Many armies have attempted to siege and end the Skaven menace by attacking at the very heart of the race. all with no avail. Black-clad and shadowy figures would seemingly emerge from the mud and drag any invaders down with them, their verminous eyes fixed on killing any trespasser that dares to step close to the blighted marshes. Diabolical machines powered by dark magic are forged within the crowded mines and factories beneath and unleashed upon the enemies of the Horde Rat. In the end, every soldier sent to the marshes has disappeared, either swallowed by the fog, the mud, or the Ratmen. Against the ever-growing corruption of Skavenblight, there seems to be no way to stop the rising swampland from rotting the world with each passing day.
On this channel, we are putting together narrative Total War cinematic battles and Warhammer lore videos. A special thank you goes to our Patreon supporters who help us in the making of more content. You can also directly support the channel through Patreon. Find the link in the description below. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification button to be the first to watch the next video. Thank you for watching and see you on the next one.